This morning, Syria's former president says he had no plans to leave the country when rebels stormed the capital.
And Israel's prime minister has a phone call with President-elect Trump about the future of its wars against Hamas and Hezbollah. Joining us now this morning to talk about the latest news in the Middle East is UCLA political science and law professor Benjamin Radd. Always good to see you. Thanks for being with us. Let's start with Syrian's former president now, Bashar al-Assad. And he said he had no plans to leave the country when those rebels took over. You just heard Jamie talk about that, but that the Russian military evacuated him. Do you think there's a chance he holds any power over Syria in the future? And are the U.S. and Israel ready for the rebel alliance that's taken over the country now?
Yeah, to the first question, incredibly unlikely there's any future for Assad anywhere outside of living as a refugee somewhere in Russia. At this point, the international community is moving on to life in Syria without the Assad family in power after decades. We've seen the European Union, which is the largest contributor of financial and humanitarian aid to Syria, stepping in to actively try to restore relations and help promote what the next phase of Syrian leadership will look like, as well as attempts by other countries around the world to reestablish ties with Syria and to essentially help usher in this next era of leadership for them, hopefully turning the tide permanently on what was decades of brutal rule by the Assad family. So no, little chance.
Well, I was watching a 60 Minutes piece last night. It's hard to fathom an entire generation was under Assad. You know, you think about just what this moment means for that country and for the people, and the hope and optimism that is there as they work to try to sort out what is happening. We do want to switch gears a little bit, though, to that phone call that we were talking about between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President-elect Trump. It's being called a very warm phone call. Netanyahu, though, has said that Israel needs complete victory over Hamas and Hezbollah. What might that victory, now spilling over into at least 3 countries outside Israel, look like with a new administration in the U.S.?
Well, Netanyahu is going to take advantage of this window that he has with an incoming Trump administration and a lame duck Biden administration, the instability in Syria with the turnover in leadership there, and the dismantling of Hamas and Hezbollah's leadership structures to try to permanently cripple those 2 organizations' ability to rearm and reconstitute. And that means essentially cutting off Syria as a potential source or pipeline of material passing through from Iran to Hamas and Hezbollah. And we've seen steps with Israel launching strikes in parts within Syrian territory, weapons depots, bases, radar facilities, things of that nature. And then now possibly discussion of repopulating parts of the occupied Golan Heights area and expanding its territorial gains there while there's this confusion and chaos in Syria until a new government fully takes over. So this will be all part of Israel's attempt to assert its authority and maintain a balance of power in its favor against any potential rise in threats from a Syrian government that it doesn't really recognize yet.
Is that not a lot for Israel to be biting off right now? They have the war in Gaza, they have Hezbollah and Lebanon they're taking on Iran, and now Syria, and a lot of the funding, of course, coming from the United States. Is there any concern that this might be too much?
Indeed, it would be if it also were not for an incoming Trump administration, which in the past has been relatively friendly and supportive of Israel's more aggressive foreign policy and military moves in the region. So if we saw, let's say, a second Biden term or a second Harris term, a first Harris term, we might not see Israel acting sort of with this liberty that it can afford to take on these additional responsibilities and these military burdens. But again, from all indications, Netanyahu's relationship with Trump is firm and solid, and the incoming president's support for Israel seems to be as steadfast as it was during his first term, which signals to Netanyahu that the country under his leadership can, in fact, afford going into these areas and territories and expanding its mission.
Netanyahu is facing a corruption trial right now. How could that impact him and these wars?
Well, this has been hanging over him now for quite a while, and he very much knows that he has to maintain his coalition in the Israeli government, in the Knesset and the parliament there. And that means appeasing the more right-wing or extremist members of that coalition to keep them in the fold, because they have threatened over and over to withdraw their support, toppling his government, and basically keeping him, being the only thing that's keeping him in power and out of prison. So Netanyahu is very much aware of how much his fate rests in the hands of these more extreme groups within the parliament, and that it is the only thing keeping him in power. So he will do what he can to appease them, while at the same time doing what he believes is the right thing as prime minister. But again, sometimes there'll be places where those two areas may or may not overlap, and we're seeing some of those differences.
Yeah, just a stunning turn of events over the past week or so. Thanks for joining us, Professor Radd, as always.
Thank you.